The rain hammered against the windows of Riverside High School as students rushed through the hallways, eager to escape the dreary November afternoon. Emma Richardson clutched her worn backpack tighter as she navigated through the crowd, her green eyes scanning the familiar faces that barely acknowledged her existence. At 17, she had grown accustomed to being invisible, the girl who sat in the back of every classroom and ate lunch alone in the library. As Emma pushed through the heavy glass doors of the main entrance, the cold wind immediately cut through her thin jacket. She pulled her hood up and hurried down the stone steps, her sneakers splashing through puddles that reflected the gray sky above. Most students had already been picked up by their parents or had caught the school bus, leaving the campus eerily quiet except for the sound of rain beating against concrete. It was then that she saw him. Huddled against the side wall of the gymnasium, partially hidden behind a large dumpster, was a boy she didn't recognize. He couldn't have been more than 15, with dark hair plastered to his forehead from the rain and clothes that looked like they hadn't been changed in days. His thin frame shook violently as he tried to shield himself from the downpour, his pale hands wrapped around his knees as he rocked back and forth. Emma stopped walking and stared. She watched as several other students passed by, some glancing at the boy with disgust, others with complete indifference. A group of popular kids from her English class actually laughed and pointed, making crude jokes about the homeless freak as they climbed into their expensive cars. Not one person stopped to help. Her heart clenched as she remembered her own experiences of being ignored, of feeling invisible and unwanted. But this was different. This boy wasn't just being socially overlooked. He was genuinely in trouble, possibly even in danger. Emma looked around the nearly empty parking lot, then back at the shivering figure. Every logical part of her brain told her to keep walking, to mind her own business like everyone else. She was already late for her part-time job at the local bookstore, and her manager, Mrs. Chen, had warned her about punctuality. Besides, what could she possibly do to help? She was just Emma Richardson, the girl nobody noticed, but as another violent shiver racked the boy's small frame, she found her feet moving toward him before she had consciously made the decision. "Hey!" she called out softly, not wanting to startle him. "Are you okay?" The boy's head snapped up, revealing striking blue eyes that seemed almost otherworldly against his pale skin. There was fear in those eyes, but also something else, a kind of ancient sadness that seemed far too mature for someone so young. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Don't call anyone. I'll leave if you want me to." Emma shook her head quickly. "No, I'm not going to make you leave. You're soaked through. How long have you been out here?" The boy's eyes darted nervously around the parking lot before settling back on her face. "Since yesterday morning," he admitted. "Maybe longer. Time gets confused when you're—" He trailed off, as if he had been about to reveal something he shouldn't. Without hesitation, Emma shrugged off her jacket and held it out to him. "Here, take this. It's not much, but it's dry." The boy stared at the jacket as if it were a foreign object. "Why?" he asked, his voice full of genuine confusion. "Why would you help me? Everyone else just walks away." Emma crouched down to his eye level, ignoring the fact that her jeans were getting soaked from the puddle she was kneeling in. "Because nobody should have to sit out here alone in the rain," she said simply. "What's your name?" For a moment the boy hesitated. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear him, he said, Daniel Morgan." "I'm Emma," she replied with a small smile. "Daniel, do you have anywhere to go? Any family or friends who are looking for you?" Daniel's expression darkened, and he shook his head. "No family. And the people who are looking for me, they're not friends." Something in his tone sent a chill down Emma's spine that had nothing to do with the rain. "Are you in some kind of trouble? Do you need me to call the police?" "No." Daniel's reaction was immediate and panicked. "Please, no police. They wouldn't understand. They couldn't help even if they wanted to." Emma studied his face, noting the genuine terror in his eyes. Whatever Daniel was running from, it was serious enough to keep him on the streets in this weather rather than seek official help. "Okay," she said finally. No police. But you can't stay out here. You'll get hypothermia. She paused, weighing her options. Her mother worked double shifts at the hospital and wouldn't be home until late. Look, I know we just met, but my house isn't far from here. You could get warm, maybe have something to eat. Daniel stared at her as if she had just offered him the moon. You would do that? For a stranger? Sometimes strangers are just friends we haven't met yet, Emma replied, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed her own words. There was something about Daniel that both drew her in and set off warning bells in her mind. But the alternative, leaving him out here to freeze, was unthinkable. After what felt like an eternity, Daniel slowly reached out and accepted her jacket. As his fingers brushed against hers, Emma felt a shock of cold that seemed to go deeper than skin, chilling her to the very bone. For just a moment, she could have sworn his eyes flashed a different color, something between gold and silver, but when she blinked, they were blue again. Thank you, Daniel whispered, and the gratitude in his voice was so profound it made Emma's chest tight. She helped him to his feet, noting how light he felt, as if he were made of hollow bones. Come on, she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the strange unease growing in her stomach. Let's get you somewhere warm. As they walked through the empty parking lot together, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she had just made a decision that would change everything. She glanced sideways at Daniel, who was clutching her jacket around his thin shoulders like armor, and wondered what she was getting herself into. The rain continued to fall as they made their way down Maple Street toward Emma's small two-story house. Daniel walked close beside her, close enough that she could feel the unnatural coldness radiating from his skin, even through the wet air. Several times, she caught him glancing nervously at the shadows between buildings, as if expecting something to emerge from them. Daniel, she said as they turned onto her street, what exactly are you running from? He was quiet for so long that Emma thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, just as they reached her front porch, he spoke in a voice so low she had to strain to hear it. Things that shouldn't exist, he said. Things that hunt in the dark and feed on fear. Emma fumbled with her house keys, trying to process his cryptic response. That sounds like something from a horror movie, she said, attempting to lighten the mood. Daniel's laugh was bitter and humorless. I wish it were that simple. Inside the house, Emma immediately turned up the thermostat and hurried to get Daniel some dry clothes. An old sweatshirt and pair of sweatpants that had belonged to her older brother Marcus before he left for college. While Daniel changed in the bathroom, she made hot chocolate and tried to convince herself that everything would be normal, that she had simply helped a homeless teenager find shelter from the storm. But even as she stirred the steaming mugs, she couldn't forget the way his touch had felt like ice against her skin, or the way his eyes had seemed to change color in the parking lot. Most unsettling of all was the way the house itself seemed to have grown colder since his arrival, as if his very presence was drawing warmth from the air. When Daniel emerged from the bathroom wearing Marcus's oversized clothes, he looked more human but somehow even more fragile. The sweatshirt hung off his thin frame, and the color had barely returned to his cheeks despite being inside for nearly 20 minutes. Better? Emma asked, handing him a mug of hot chocolate. Daniel wrapped his fingers around the warm ceramic and nodded. Much better. I can't remember the last time someone was kind to me. They sat together on the couch in Emma's living room, the silence broken only by the sound of rain against the windows and the occasional rumble of thunder. Emma found herself studying Daniel's profile as he stared into his mug, noting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. You're not from around here, are you? She asked. No, Daniel replied. I've been traveling for a while, moving from place to place, trying to stay ahead of. He paused and shook his head. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you helped me when no one else would. Emma set down her mug and turned to face him fully. Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you in danger? Is someone going to come looking for you here? For a moment, fear flickered across Daniel's features. Then he met her eyes with a steady gaze that seemed far too mature for his young face. "Yes," he said simply. "They will come. They always do. But not tonight. Tonight, for the first time in months, I feel safe." Emma's heart raced. "Who are they? What do they want with you?" Daniel was quiet for a long time, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Finally, he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "There are things in this world that most people never see, Emma. Ancient things that exist in the spaces between light and shadow. Some call them monsters. Others call them myths. But they're real, and they've been hunting me since I was 12 years old." Emma's rational mind wanted to dismiss his words as the delusions of a traumatized teenager. But something in his eyes, something in the way the temperature seemed to drop whenever he spoke about these mysterious hunters, made her believe him. "Why?" she asked. "Why are they hunting you?" Daniel looked down at his hands, which Emma noticed were still pale and cold-looking, despite the warm drink and dry clothes. "Because of what I am," he said so quietly she almost didn't hear him. "Because of what I'm becoming." Before Emma could ask what he meant, a sound from outside made them both freeze. It was subtle at first, the soft crunch of footsteps on wet gravel. But it was definitely getting closer to the house. Daniel's entire body went rigid, and the mug slipped from his fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. His eyes, which had been blue just moments before, now glowed with an eerie silver light. "They found me," he whispered, his voice filled with terror. "I'm so sorry, Emma. I never should have let you help me. Now you're in danger, too." The footsteps stopped just outside the front door, followed by what sounded like scratching against the wood. Emma's blood ran cold as she realized the scratching was too deliberate, too rhythmic to be from an animal. "What do we do?" she whispered back. Daniel stood slowly, his movements careful and controlled despite the fear in his eyes. "We run," he said. "We run and we hope they don't catch us." But even as he spoke, Emma could see in his expression that he didn't believe they would make it out of this unscathed. Whatever was waiting for them outside, whatever had been hunting Daniel through the shadows of the world, had finally cornered its prey, and now Emma was trapped right alongside him. The scratching at the door grew louder, more insistent, and Emma realized with growing horror that her decision to help a shivering boy in the rain had just pulled her into a nightmare she never could have imagined. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as the scratching at the front door intensified, creating a sound like fingernails dragging across wood. Daniel grabbed her hand, his fingers ice-cold against her skin, and pulled her toward the back of the house. "The kitchen," he whispered urgently. "Is there a back door?" Emma nodded, her throat too tight with fear to speak. She led him through the narrow hallway, past family photos that seemed to watch them with accusatory eyes. Behind them, the scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by something far worse: complete silence. They reached the kitchen just as the front door exploded inward with a sound like thunder. Emma spun around to see 3 figures standing in the doorway of her living room, silhouetted against the gray afternoon light. They were tall and unnaturally thin, wearing long dark coats that seemed to absorb the light around them. Their faces were hidden in shadow, but Emma could feel their attention, like ice water in her veins. "Daniel Morgan," one of them spoke, its voice like rustling leaves. "You have led us quite a chase, young one." Daniel stepped protectively in front of Emma, though she noticed his hands were shaking. "Leave her out of this," he said, trying to sound braver than he clearly felt. "She's innocent. She doesn't know anything." The figure tilted its head with predatory interest. "Innocent? Perhaps. But she has seen you now, touched you, invited you into her sanctuary. That makes her involved." Emma watched in growing terror as the 3 figures glided rather than walked into her living room, their movements too fluid to be entirely human. As they drew closer, she could make out more details: pale skin that seemed to glow with its own light, eyes that reflected the dim interior lighting like an animal's, and smiles that revealed teeth far too sharp for any human mouth. "What are they?" Emma whispered to Daniel. "Vampires," Daniel replied, his voice barely audible. "But not the kind from movies. These are the old ones, the pure ones. They don't just feed on blood, they feed on life itself." The lead vampire laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "How precious. The boy has found himself a protector. Tell me, little girl, do you truly understand what you've sheltered under your roof?" Emma's mind reeled. Vampires. The word felt impossible, even as she stared at the creatures in her living room, even as every instinct screamed at her to run. But she couldn't run. Not when Daniel was standing between her and these things. Not when he was clearly terrified but still trying to protect her. "I understand that he was cold and scared and needed help," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I understand that 3 grown things chasing a teenager through the rain makes them the monsters, not him." The vampire's expression shifted, showing what might have been amusement. "Brave words. But you misunderstand the situation entirely. We are not the hunters here. We are the shepherds. And young Daniel is a wolf who has wandered far from his pack." "That's not true," Daniel said fiercely. "You know what you did to my family. You know why I had to run." "Your family chose their path," the vampire replied coldly, "just as you will choose yours. The transformation cannot be stopped forever, Daniel. Already we can smell it on you. The change, the hunger. How long has it been since you've fed properly? Since you've embraced what you truly are?" Emma felt Daniel's hand tighten around hers, and she noticed that his skin was growing colder by the minute. "What transformation?" she asked, though part of her already dreaded the answer. Daniel's shoulders slumped in defeat. "I'm like them, Emma. Not fully, not yet, but I will be. My whole family was turned when I was 12. My parents, my sister Sarah. The vampires said it was an honor that we had been chosen to join their ranks. But I ran before the change could be completed." Emma stared at him in shock. "You're becoming a vampire?" "The process takes years for someone so young," the lead vampire explained with clinical detachment. "But it cannot be stopped. The boy has been fighting his nature, denying himself the sustenance he needs, but eventually the hunger will win. It always does." As if summoned by the vampire's words, Daniel suddenly doubled over in pain. His face contorted in agony, and when he looked up at Emma, she saw that his eyes were no longer blue or silver. They were glowing red with an inner fire. "I'm sorry," Daniel gasped. "I tried to fight it. I tried to stay human for as long as I could." Emma watched in horrified fascination as Daniel's canine teeth elongated into sharp points. His skin, already pale, became almost translucent, and she could see dark veins spreading across his neck and face like ink in water. But even as his appearance changed, even as the evidence of his inhuman nature became undeniable, Emma found herself stepping closer to him rather than away. "I don't care what you're becoming," she said firmly, ignoring the gasps from the vampires. "You're still the boy who was shivering in the rain. You're still the person who tried to protect me from them." The lead vampire hissed in displeasure. "Foolish child, do you not understand? He will drain you dry before the night is over. The hunger is taking hold now. There is no fighting it." Daniel's head snapped up, and for a moment Emma saw nothing human in his expression, only predatory hunger and desperate need. His gaze fixed on her neck, on the pulse point where her blood flowed closest to the surface. She could see him struggling against instincts that were rapidly overtaking his conscious mind. "Emma," he said through gritted teeth, "you need to run. Please, I don't want to hurt you, but I don't know how much longer I can control this." Instead of running, Emma did something that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. She stepped forward and took Daniel's face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Then don't fight it alone," she said. "If you need blood, take some of mine. But you don't have to become like them. You can choose to be different." The vampires laughed in unison, the sound like wind through a graveyard. "Impossible," one of them said. "The hunger cannot be satisfied with mere sips. He will drain her completely, and then he will join us as he was always meant to." But something unexpected happened. As Emma held Daniel's face in her hands, as she offered herself willingly rather than as prey, a change came over him. The red glow in his eyes softened to gold, and though his fangs remained extended, his expression became more human, more controlled. "I won't take everything," he whispered to her. "I won't become them." Emma nodded, tilting her head to expose her neck. "I trust you." Daniel hesitated for only a moment before carefully placing his mouth against her throat. The bite was sharp but brief, and Emma felt a strange warmth spread through her body rather than the cold drain she had expected. Daniel took only what he needed, pulling back after mere seconds with Emma's blood on his lips. The change in him was immediate and dramatic. His skin regained some color, his movements became more fluid and confident, and the desperate hunger that had been consuming him seemed to settle into something more manageable. The vampires, meanwhile, appeared genuinely shocked. "Impossible," the leader repeated. "No fledgling has ever shown such control during their first true feeding." "Maybe because no fledgling has ever had someone offer themselves freely," Emma said, still feeling dizzy but oddly exhilarated. "Maybe the difference isn't in what you are, but in how you choose to use what you are." Daniel wiped the blood from his mouth and stood straighter, and Emma could see that something fundamental had changed in him. He was still clearly not human, but he retained his humanity in a way that the three creatures in her living room had obviously lost long ago. "She's right," Daniel said, his voice stronger now. "I don't have to be like you. I can choose to be better." The lead vampire's expression darkened with rage. "You think your little display of restraint changes anything? You think one willing meal will sustain you? The hunger will return, stronger than before, and when it does, you will kill her and everyone else you encounter. It is inevitable." "No," a new voice said from behind them, deep and commanding with an authority that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "It is not inevitable." Everyone in the room turned toward the sound, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. Standing in her destroyed doorway was a man who radiated power like heat from a flame. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and piercing green eyes that seemed to see everything at once. He wore a long black coat that billowed around him, despite the absence of any wind. And when he smiled, Emma could see fangs that put the other vampires to shame. But unlike the three creatures who had been hunting Daniel, this man's presence felt protective rather than threatening. Ancient, but not malevolent. "Marcus Nightborn," the lead vampire breathed, and Emma could hear actual fear in its voice. "You have no authority here." The man Marcus stepped into the room with predatory grace, and the three vampires immediately backed away. "I have authority wherever I choose to claim it," he said calmly. "And I have been watching this situation with great interest." Emma felt Daniel tense beside her. "Who is he?" she whispered. "The Vampire King," Daniel replied, his voice filled with awe and terror in equal measure. "The oldest and most powerful of our kind. Legend says he's been alive for over 2,000 years. Marcus's gaze shifted to Daniel and Emma, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Daniel Morgan," he said, "you have surprised me. In all my centuries, I have never seen a new vampire show such remarkable control during their first feeding. And you, Emma Richardson, have shown extraordinary courage in the face of the impossible." "How do you know my name?" "I know many things," Marcus replied. "I know that you chose compassion over safety when you found Daniel in the rain. I know that you offered your life to help him control his transformation. And I know that the 3 hunters who broke into your home tonight have violated several of our most sacred laws." The 3 vampires shifted nervously, but the leader tried to maintain his authority. We were simply collecting a runaway fledgling, as is our right under the old laws. The old laws, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, specify that fledglings who demonstrate unusual control and moral restraint are to be brought before the council for evaluation, not hunted like common prey. You have exceeded your authority and endangered humans in the process. With movements too fast for Emma to follow, Marcus was suddenly standing between Daniel and the three hunters. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably, and frost began forming on the windows. You have two choices, Marcus said to the hunters. Leave now and report to the council for judgment, or face me directly. Choose quickly, my patience has limits. The three vampires looked at each other, clearly weighing their options. Finally, the leader spoke through gritted teeth. This is not over, Nightborn. The boy will fall to his nature eventually, and when he does, we will be there to collect him. Perhaps, Marcus replied, but not tonight. The hunters dissolved into shadow and mist, flowing out through the broken door like smoke. Within seconds they were gone, leaving only the lingering scent of decay and the memory of their glowing eyes. Emma slumped against the kitchen counter, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. This is insane, she muttered. This whole thing is completely insane. Marcus turned to her with what might have been sympathy. I imagine it must seem that way, but you have been thrust into a world that exists alongside your own, Emma. A world of shadows and ancient powers that most humans never glimpse. And now I'm part of it, Emma said, more a statement than a question. Now you are connected to it, Marcus corrected, through your bond with Daniel. Whether you choose to remain part of it will depend on decisions yet to be made. Daniel moved closer to Emma, and she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. What happens now? He asked Marcus. I can't keep running forever, and I won't put Emma in danger again. Marcus studied them both with those ancient green eyes, seeming to weigh possibilities that Emma couldn't even begin to imagine. Now, he said finally, we discuss your future. Both of your futures. Because Emma Richardson, whether you realize it or not, you have just become one of the most important humans in the supernatural world. Emma stared at him in confusion. What do you mean? You have done something that should be impossible, Marcus explained. You have formed a bond with a vampire during his transformation that has fundamentally changed the nature of that transformation. Daniel is not becoming the kind of monster that his hunters expected. He is becoming something new, something that has never existed before. Emma looked at Daniel, seeing him with new eyes. What is he becoming? Marcus smiled, and for the first time since his arrival, the expression seemed genuinely warm. Something that could change everything, he said. A vampire who retains his humanity not through willpower alone, but through genuine connection to human compassion, a bridge between our worlds. As if to emphasize his words, Emma noticed that Daniel's appearance had continued to change. While he still possessed the pale skin and sharp canines of a vampire, there was something fundamentally different about his presence. He radiated warmth rather than cold, protection rather than menace. But the transformation is not complete, Marcus continued. And there will be others who seek to stop it, to force Daniel back into the traditional vampire mold. The three who were here tonight were just the beginning. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the supernatural cold that still lingered in her house. So what do? You learn, Marcus said simply. You learn about our world, about the dangers that exist within it, and about the power that lies in the bond you two have formed. And then you decide whether you're willing to fight for something that has never existed before. Emma looked at Daniel, at the boy she had found shivering in the rain, who had turned out to be something far more complicated and dangerous than she could have imagined. But underneath all the supernatural elements, underneath the fangs and the blood and the ancient powers at play, she could still see the frightened teenager who had thanked her for a simple act of kindness. I'm willing, she said, surprised by her own certainty. Whatever this is, whatever we're up against, I'm willing to fight for it." Daniel's smile was radiant with relief and gratitude. "Thank you," he said, "for everything, for saving me in ways I didn't even know I needed to be saved." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Then we have much work to do. But first, we need to secure this location and begin your education. The supernatural world is vast and complex, and you will need to understand it if you hope to survive in it." As if summoned by his words, the broken front door began to repair itself, the splintered wood flowing back together like liquid. The scattered pieces of Emma's life, the broken mug, the overturned furniture, righted themselves with invisible hands. "Magic," Marcus explained at Emma's amazed expression. "One of many tools you will need to learn about." Emma watched the impossible repairs taking place around her and realized that her life had just taken a turn into territory she never could have imagined. She was no longer just Emma Richardson, the invisible girl from Riverside High School. She was something new, something connected to ancient powers and supernatural conflicts that stretched back centuries. And somehow, despite all the danger and uncertainty, she found herself looking forward to discovering exactly what that something was. 3 months had passed since the night Emma Richardson's quiet life had been turned upside down by supernatural forces beyond her imagination. The autumn had given way to a bitter winter, and snow now covered the grounds of Ravencrest Academy, the hidden school for supernatural beings that had become Emma's new home. She stood at the tall windows of her dormitory room, watching Daniel practice combat techniques with other students in the courtyard below. Even from this distance, she could see how much he had changed. The frightened, shivering boy she had found behind the school gymnasium had transformed into something magnificent and powerful, yet still fundamentally kind. His vampire abilities had fully manifested now. The supernatural speed and strength, the enhanced senses, the ability to move with deadly grace. But unlike traditional vampires, Daniel had retained something precious, his capacity for genuine human emotion and moral judgment. The bond they had formed that night in her kitchen had somehow anchored his humanity, even as his body underwent its supernatural transformation. "Still watching him train?" asked a familiar voice from behind her. Emma turned to see her roommate, Sophia Blackwood, entering with an armful of ancient texts. Sophia was a witch from one of the oldest magical families in America, and she had become Emma's closest friend and guide in navigating the complex social structures of the supernatural world. "Marcus says he's the strongest new vampire he's seen in centuries," Emma replied, settling into the cushioned window seat. "But he still has nightmares sometimes, about his family, about what those hunters did to them." Sophia set down her books and joined Emma at the window. "Trauma doesn't disappear just because you develop supernatural abilities," she said gently. "If anything, enhanced senses can make painful memories more vivid." Emma nodded, understanding all too well. Her own transition into the supernatural world hadn't been without its challenges. Learning that vampires, werewolves, witches, and dozens of other magical beings existed alongside ordinary humans had required a complete restructuring of her understanding of reality. But more challenging still had been discovering her own unexpected abilities. It had started small, an unusual intuition about people's emotions, a tendency for supernatural beings to trust her more quickly than they should. Marcus had explained that her bond with Daniel had awakened something dormant in her bloodline, something that made her uniquely suited to bridge the gap between human and supernatural communities. "Emma," Sophia said, her voice taking on a more serious tone, "Professor Valdres wants to see you in his office." "Something about your final project," Emma groaned. Professor Thaddeus Valdres taught supernatural history and political structures, and his final project was legendary among students for its difficulty. Emma had chosen to research the historical instances of human-vampire bonds and their impact on supernatural society, a topic that was both personally relevant and academically ambitious. "Did he say what about?" Emma asked, gathering her notebooks and laptop. "Just that he had some new information that might interest you," Sophia replied. "But he looked..." Concerned, Emma made her way through the academy's winding corridors, past classrooms where students learned to control magical abilities that would seem impossible to the outside world. She had grown to love Ravencrest Academy, with its ancient stone walls and hidden passages, its library filled with books that wrote themselves, and its greenhouse where plants from other dimensions grew alongside ordinary roses. Professor Valdris's office was located in one of the oldest parts of the building, behind a door marked with symbols that shifted and changed when viewed directly. Emma knocked and waited for the familiar gravelly voice to call her in. "Ah, Miss Richardson." Professor Valdris greeted her as she entered. He was an elderly man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries, though Emma had never been entirely sure what type of supernatural being he was. "Please, sit down. We have much to discuss." Emma settled into the chair across from his desk, noting the serious expression on his weathered face. "Is this about my research project, Professor?" "In part," Valdris replied, pulling out a thick leather-bound tome that Emma had never seen before. "I've been conducting some research of my own, prompted by your unique situation. What I've discovered is both fascinating and deeply troubling." He opened the book to a page covered with intricate diagrams and text written in what looked like several different languages. Throughout supernatural history, there have been only 7 documented cases of successful human-vampire bonds. In each case, the bonded vampire demonstrated abilities far beyond those of their traditionally turned counterparts. Emma leaned forward, intrigued despite her growing sense of unease. What kind of abilities? Enhanced strength and speed, certainly. But more importantly, they developed what we might call empathic vampirism, the ability to feed on emotions and psychic energy rather than requiring blood for survival. They became living bridges between the human and vampire worlds, capable of understanding and communicating with both. Emma thought about Daniel, about how he had been able to sustain himself on increasingly small amounts of blood, supplemented by what seemed to be emotional connections with the people around him. "That sounds like what's happening with Daniel." "Indeed," Valdris said grimly. "Which brings us to the troubling part of this history. In 6 of the 7 cases, both the vampire and their human bond were eventually destroyed by those who viewed their existence as a threat to the established order." A chill ran down Emma's spine. Destroyed how? Various methods. Sometimes by vampire councils who saw bonded vampires as abominations that threatened traditional feeding structures. Sometimes by human authorities who discovered the supernatural world and viewed the bonded pairs as the greatest threat. But in every case, there were those who could not tolerate the existence of beings who transcended the boundaries between human and vampire. Emma's hands clenched in her lap. "And the 7th case?" Professor Valdris's expression grew even more grave. "The 7th case simply disappeared, vanished from all records around 1847. No one knows what happened to them, whether they were destroyed like the others, or whether they found some way to escape the cycle of persecution." "Professor," Emma said quietly, "are you telling me that Daniel and I are in danger?" "I'm telling you that your very existence challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of vampirism that some beings have held for millennia," Valdris replied, "and that, historically, such challenges have not been tolerated." As if summoned by their conversation, a soft knock came at the office door. Professor Valdris called for the visitor to enter, and Marcus Nightborn stepped into the room. The Vampire King's usual composed demeanor seemed strained, and Emma immediately sensed that something was wrong. "Marcus." Professor Valdris greeted him. "I was just explaining to Miss Richardson the historical context of her situation." "Then you'll understand why I bring urgent news," Marcus said, his green eyes fixed on Emma with an intensity that made her heart race. "The European Council has issued a formal decree. They're sending a delegation to investigate the anomalous vampire and determine whether he poses a threat to supernatural stability. Emma's blood ran cold. They're coming here? To the academy? They arrive tomorrow, Marcus confirmed. Led by Counselor Dmitry Volkov, one of the most traditional and ruthless vampires in existence, he was personally involved in the destruction of at least 3 of the historical bonded pairs that Professor Valdris mentioned. What does that mean for Daniel and Emma? Professor Valdris asked. Marcus's expression was grim. It means they'll likely recommend immediate separation of the bond and Daniel's placement under direct council supervision. If Emma resists or if Daniel shows any sign of the enhanced abilities we've observed, they may recommend more permanent solutions. Emma stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the stone floor. They want to kill us. They want to eliminate what they see as a threat to the natural order, Marcus corrected. Which, yes, could very well mean killing you both if they determine that the bond cannot be safely broken. Emma's mind raced. After everything she and Daniel had been through, after all the progress he had made in controlling his abilities while retaining his humanity, it seemed impossible that it could all be stripped away by some ancient council's fear of change. There has to be something we can do, she said. Some way to prove that Daniel isn't a threat, that what we have is beneficial rather than dangerous. Professor Valdris and Marcus exchanged a meaningful look. There might be, the professor said slowly, but it would require you to do something that no bonded human has ever attempted before. What? Emma asked immediately. The bond between you and Daniel is still developing, Marcus explained. It has given Daniel abilities beyond those of traditional vampires, but it hasn't reached its full potential. If you were willing to deepen the connection, to fully embrace the supernatural transformation that your bloodline makes possible. You're talking about me becoming something other than human, Emma realized. Not vampire, Professor Valdris clarified quickly. Something entirely new. A being who exists fully in both worlds, who could serve as living proof that cooperation between humans and supernatural entities is not only possible, but beneficial. Emma sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were suggesting. What would that mean? What would I become? We don't know exactly, Marcus admitted. But based on the historical records and the changes we've already observed in both you and Daniel, we believe you would become something that has never existed before. A true bridge between worlds, with abilities that would make you invaluable to both human and supernatural communities. Emma thought about Daniel, about the boy she had found shivering in the rain, who had become so much more than either of them had ever imagined. She thought about the life she had left behind, the invisible girl who ate lunch alone and walked home through empty parking lots. That girl seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different lifetime. If I do this, she said carefully, if I agree to this transformation, what happens to Daniel? What happens to us? If the transformation is successful, you would both become beings that the council couldn't simply dismiss or destroy, Marcus replied. You would be too valuable, too unique. They would have no choice but to acknowledge your right to exist. And if it's not successful? The silence that followed her question was answer enough. Emma closed her eyes and tried to imagine her life without Daniel, without the supernatural world that had given her purpose and belonging for the first time. Then she imagined Daniel being taken away by the council, forced back into the mold of a traditional vampire, losing everything that made him special. When do we do it? She asked, opening her eyes to meet Marcus's surprised gaze. Emma, he said carefully, you should take time to consider this decision. Once the transformation begins, there's no going back. I've been considering it for months, Emma replied, and she realized it was true. Every day spent learning about the supernatural world, every night spent feeling the growing connection between herself and Daniel, had been leading to this moment. I'm not the same person who found Daniel behind that gymnasium. I haven't been for a while. This just makes it official. Professor Valdris leaned forward. You understand that we can't guarantee what you'll become? The process could change you in ways we can't predict. Emma smiled. thinking about all the ways she had already changed since that rainy November afternoon. But I also understand that some things are worth the risk. Marcus nodded slowly, respect evident in his ancient eyes. Then we begin preparations immediately. The ritual must be completed before the council arrives, and it will require precise timing and considerable power. What do I need to do? First, we need to inform Daniel, Marcus said. The transformation will require his active participation and consent. The bond between you must be strengthened willingly by both parties, or it will fail entirely. Emma's heart raced at the thought of explaining this to Daniel, of asking him to take such an enormous risk for her sake, but she also knew, with a certainty that went deeper than logic, that he would agree. They had already risked everything for each other once. This was simply the next step in a journey they had begun together. He'll say yes, she said confidently. I believe you're right, Marcus replied. But Emma, you should know, even if the transformation is successful, your life will never be simple or safe. There will always be those who fear what you represent, who see your very existence as a threat to their power. Emma thought about the 3 vampire hunters who had broken into her house, about the terror in their eyes when they had seen Daniel's unusual control. She thought about Counselor Volkov and the delegation coming to judge them, about the historical bonded pairs who had been destroyed for daring to exist. I stopped having a simple life the day I decided to help a stranger in the rain, she said. But that decision led me to discover who I really am, what I'm capable of. I wouldn't change it for anything. Professor Valdris closed the ancient tome and stood. Then we have work to do. The transformation ritual must be conducted at the height of tomorrow's lunar eclipse, when the barriers between worlds are at their thinnest. We have less than 18 hours to prepare. Marcus rose as well, his expression shifting into the commanding presence of the Vampire King. I'll gather the necessary materials and prepare the ritual space. Professor, I'll need your expertise with the ancient binding ceremonies. Of course, Valdris replied. And Emma, you should spend this time with Daniel. Explain what we're proposing. Help him understand what it will mean for both of you. Emma nodded and headed for the door, but Marcus's voice stopped her. Emma, he said softly. What you're choosing to do tomorrow night, it's either the bravest thing I've witnessed in 2,000 years or the most foolish. Possibly both. Emma turned back with a smile that felt more confident than she had expected. Maybe that's what makes it worth doing. As she left the professor's office and headed back through the academy's ancient corridors, Emma felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. Tomorrow night, everything would change. She would either become something entirely new or die in the attempt. But either way, she would face it alongside Daniel, the boy who had taught her that sometimes the most important choices were the ones that seemed impossible. The invisible girl from Riverside High School was about to disappear forever. In her place would stand something the world had never seen before, if they survived long enough to find out what that something was. Emma quickened her pace, eager to find Daniel and begin the most important conversation of their extraordinary lives. Outside the academy windows, snow continued to fall, but Emma no longer felt the cold. Tomorrow's eclipse would bring either transformation or destruction, but tonight she had one last evening to spend, as Emma Richardson, human girl who had saved a shivering boy and discovered that sometimes salvation worked both ways. The future stretched before them, uncertain and dangerous, and filled with possibilities that had never existed before. Emma couldn't wait to step into it.